My daughter-in-law told me bluntly, "There's no money. You stay home." I grinned and said, "All right." However, I was already sipping coffee on the deck when they boarded the ship. My kid cried out, "Are you stalking us? Get out of here, you crazy woman." However, the captain came up and said something that caused them to go pale and fall to their knees. Friends, I have a small favor to ask before we start this story. Tell us in the comments the city you're listening from, hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this are made louder by your support. Have fun listening. The smell of bell peppers and smothered onions filled the kitchen. It was a comforting, well-known aroma that always brought back memories of simpler days when the table was full. I tried not to think about the idea that I would probably be eating this dinner by alone. Once more, as I flipped the patties in the skillet, the carriage house, a tiny guest cottage, apart from the enormous estate I had constructed decades earlier, had become the size of my entire world. I transferred everything to Tavorius 10 years ago following the death of my husband. "You're a man," I informed my son, "that you are now the family's leader." After that, I wanted him to feel accountable for lifting his shoulders. However, he merely developed a hunger for his wife Kenyatta's demands rather than eagle's wings. I now reside here in an attempt to blend in, like an outdated piece of furniture that is too sentimental to be discarded yet no longer complements the interior design. There was a squeak in the door. Tavorius and Kenyatta followed a blast of cool autumn air into the warm kitchen. They appeared tense. Kenyatta carried herself with exaggerated tragedy, while Tavorius avoided eye contact and fiddled with the button on his blazer. With a heavy sigh, as though bearing the burden of all the ancestors on her back, she threw her trench coat upon a chair without even saying hello. Tavorius started, "Mama, we need to talk," but his voice faltered. He glanced at his wife, seeking support. Kenyatta took the lead right away. Her voice was dripping with honey and carried that phony ring of worry that always made my jaw hard. "Mother Oilia, we have a crisis. Do you recall that we discussed the roof in the East Wing that leak?" I gave a nod. I remembered, of course. I took out $15,000 from my savings account a week ago, which was nearly all of the money I had left over for my burial fund, and handed it to them. They claimed that if the repairs weren't made right away, my house would begin to decay. Kenyatta, however, paused abruptly and put a palm to her chest. The estimate increased. Black mold was discovered when the contractors opened the ceiling. The beams are completely deteriorated. In essence, all of the cents have vanished, and we even had to use our own money. I said nothing, awaiting the hit. The way a storm builds in your joints long before the first thunderclap, I sensed it coming. "And where is this going?" I lowered the heat beneath the skillet and inquired in a low voice. Kenyatta yelled out, "We can't take you on the cruise." Her eyes briefly glowed with triumph before she covered it up with sadness. "Oilea, the money simply isn't there. You get it. After the cost of tickets increased, Tavorius and I were barely able to make ends meet because of this repair. Our nerves are shot." At last, Tavorius raised his gaze to me. His eyes were filled with guilt and fear of his wife. "I'm sorry, Mama," he said. "Yes, guard the house," Kenyatta added with a pouty, irate grimace. "It's better for you to stay here. You can keep an eye on the workers, watch the garden, and we'll bring you back a souvenir." I felt a peculiar emptiness as I glanced at her and said, "Someone has to maintain order while we pinch pennies on this trip." There was a chilly clarity instead of bitterness or rage. I looked down at her wrist. The sleeve of Kenyatta's deep mahogany shirt fell down as she straightened her hair. There was a sparkling jewelry on her wrist, a slender diamond-paved strand of white gold, a bracelet for tennis. That design was familiar to me. The jeweler was someone I know. I was aware of the cost. It wasn't jewelry for a costume. That component was at least 3 times as expensive as the repairs she had just been complaining about. She swiftly pulled her arm down when she saw me staring, but it was too late. "All right," I responded. I spoke steadily. It sounded really serene, even to me. They looked at each other and said, "If there's no money, there's no money. You two go rest. I'll watch the house." They anticipated tears, guilt trips, and pleading. They were taken aback by my poise, but relief overcame their mistrust. That was resolved then. Kenyatta forgot the tragedy act and leaped to his feet. "We have to pack quickly. Tomorrow morning, we depart early. Don't give the food to us. Before the journey, we are fasting." I was left alone in the chilly kitchen as they departed. I did the things I usually do in the evening, cleaned the table and washed the dishes. The garden became a black and white image as the darkness outside deepened. I collected the trash closer to midnight and carried it to the main gate's trash cans. The weather was cool, dry leaves were tossed down the driveway by the wind. I walked over to the big trash that my son and his wife, who lived in the main house, used. They propped the lid open. Before going to bed, Torius must have tossed something away in a rush. A crumpled ball of paper fell from the bin and was rolled to my feet by the wind. I stooped to pick it up. The thick paper was smashed into a reckless ball. I intended to simply throw it away, but I hesitated for some reason, possibly because the paper was too thick for a grocery shop receipt. I made the sheet smooth. The letters and numbers were clear, even in the dim light of the streetlights above. It was an Apex Voyages invoice. The date was yesterday. Tavoria St. James is the payer. Memo, reservation. The Gilded Magnolia is a riverboat with a grand owner's suite. $15,000. My surroundings froze. The rustling of leaves, the sounds of the night, and the barking of a dog in the distance all disappeared. All that was left were the numbers on the page. 15,000, just as much as I had given them 3 days prior. My funds. The roof was not being fixed. No mold was present. They merely used my money to purchase a lavish trip for themselves. And they openly informed me that I was useless and that I should be left to watch over the house while they drank champagne with my life savings. I didn't feel my chest constrict. My heart did not falter. Instead, it started to pound rhythmically, strongly, and steadily, like the diesel engine of a huge ship gaining speed. The frigid heat of realization blasted away the tears that may have formed for a normal granny. Kenyatta believed she had triumphed over a frail, elderly woman. Tavorius believed Mama would put up with it all and forgive him. Before I put on an apron and began making cornbread, they had forgotten who I was. They forgot that in the trucking and logistics industry, the name St. James was once pronounced with honor. I folded the invoice nicely and put it in my cardigan pocket. Then I went back to the carriage house, entered the bedroom, and locked the door. I took out an old leather agenda from the bottom drawer of my dresser, which was under a pile of linen tablecloths. It smelled of pricey paper and old leather. I turned to the first page of it. There was just one number put there, direct line, a personal channel that I hadn't called in 12 years. I took the phone. I knew someone would answer even if it rang for a long time. He would respond to me, even if it was in the middle of the night, talking. The answer came from a masculine voice, hoarse and shocked. On this line. Who is this? I said, hello, Supreme. I spoke in a steely tone. I'm Oilia. I need a stateroom on the Golden Magnolia immediately. And I need to use my executive override, Oilia. Heavy and palpable silence hung on the line. It's me, indeed. Never inquire as to why I'm calling. Simply pay attention. I urgently require the Riverflow Holdings Group's current ownership structure. In the gloom of my bedroom, a minute later, I discovered something that truly made me grin for the first time in 2 days. The Gilded Magnolia's owner, the cruise company, was more than just a partner. We had purchased the subsidiary 15 years prior, while I was in charge, and my silent partner's shares also extended to it, based on the records Supreme retrieved from the archives. I wasn't merely requesting a favor, legally speaking. I was getting ready to enter my own ship's deck. The following 48 hours went by in a mode that my body immediately remembered, but I had nearly forgotten. Ruthless, emotionless, effectiveness. I was stuck in the bathroom with the water running for cover, while Tavorius and Kenyatta rushed about the home fighting over which baggage to take. When I recounted the problem, my lawyer, Solomon, an old acquaintance with a voice as creaky as an unoiled wagon wheel, just laughed. At first, he tried to talk me out of taking dramatic measures. You always had a long-term strategy. Oilia, get what you want. The documents transferring operational control for the length of the journey will be prepared by me. We'll let Captain Thaddeus know. Thaddeus, Emmerich. I recalled him as an honest, straight-Tazrael young first mate. That was to my advantage. I packed in between calls. Using the key that hung around my neck with my crucifix, I opened the cedar cupboard at the back. My former existence was hanging there in huge canvas garment bags. Kenyatta would have sold or stolen the clothes long ago, or she had never seen them. I took out an Italian-made, well-cut, cream-colored linen pantsuit to match it, an abstract design in gold and terracotta hues on a silk scarf, no shabby slippers, no house jackets. I was wearing dress blues if I was going to war. The main house was in disarray on the morning of their departure. Tavoris was being yelled at by Kenyatta for a misplaced makeup bag. Tavarorius was frantically attempting to stuff another duffel bag into the SUV's trunk. Wearing my typical gray jacket to conceal my new clothes, I strolled out onto the porch. I was holding a decoy, an old, scuffed travel bag. My voice said Tavoris. He almost dropped a toiletry kit as he flinched. He swore and wiped his sweaty brow. Mama, what now? We're running late, he growled. Calmly, I said, I wanted to say I won't be sitting at home. She requested assistance, saying, I'm going to Sister Alpha's place. Her sciatica is acting up. Kenyatta, who was already wearing dark shades, leaned out of the car window and said, I'll be back in a week, just when you return. Alpha. Perfect, she exclaimed, her happiness evident. Less electricity wasted. Leave the keys with the neighbor. All right, we're leaving. Tavarorius, get in already. They didn't even hug me. Tavorius waved a hand, jumped behind the wheel, and the car peeled out toward the gate, tires screeching. I watched them go until the red taillights disappeared around the bend. Safe travels, I whispered into the void. Exactly 30 minutes later, a black stretch sedan pulled up to my gate, gravel crunching softly. A chauffeur in a cap stepped out, opened the door for me, and bowed his head respectfully. Mrs., we are prepared. St. James, Captain Thaddeus is expecting you. I slid onto the soft leather of the back seat. The gray raincoat fell to the floor. I put on dark sunglasses, adjusted the silk scarf at my neck, and looked into the rearview mirror. Staring back was not a pensioner who could be tricked and abandoned. Staring back was the boss. The drive to the port in New Orleans took an hour. We moved fast, confidently, ignoring traffic, thanks to the special pass on the windshield. When we pulled up to the river terminal, I saw exactly what I expected. The boarding line was massive. People were shoving, children were crying, someone was arguing with security. Heat, humidity, the smell of exhaust fumes. My driver didn't get in the general line. The car smoothly bypassed the crowd and headed toward a closed gate marked Service Entrance Authorized Personnel Only. The guard, seeing the license plate, instantly hit a button, and the barrier flew up. We drove right onto the wharf, where asphalt turned to concrete right up to the gangway. I saw them about 50 yards away behind a chain-link fence separating the VIP zone from the general mass. Torius, sweating profusely, was dragging 2 massive suitcases, trying to push through to the check-in counter. Kenyatta stood nearby, waving her hands and yelling at a porter who seemed to be ignoring her hysterics. They looked pathetic in their pretense of luxury paid for with stolen money. The driver opened the door. I stepped onto the concrete pier. The wind from the Mississippi hit my face, humid, heavy, smelling of freedom and river silt. 2 young crew members in impeccable white uniforms immediately ran up to me. Madam St. James, one of them said, scooping up my small bag, as if it were a royal relic. Welcome aboard. The captain has instructed that your bags be transported right away to the owner's suite. Please follow us. I adjusted my glasses, and without looking back at the fence where my son and daughter-in-law were fighting for a place in the sun, I stepped onto the gangway. They were too busy with their petty scandal to notice how the shadow of my limousine fell over their dreams. I entered the owner's suite, and the door closed silently behind me, cutting off the noise of the port. Perfect silence reigned here, broken only by the barely audible hum of the air conditioning. The space was immense. A living room with panoramic windows, a bedroom finished in mahogany, and a private exit to a secluded section of the deck. But I wasn't interested in the interiors I had approved from catalogists 10 years ago. I was interested in the large wall-mounted monitor connected to the internal security system. I pressed a button on the remote. The screen flared to life, splitting into several sectors. The camera in the deck, a corridor, showed exactly what I was waiting for. Tavorius and Kenyatta were walking down the carpeted hallway, looking around like kids in a candy store. Tavorius dragged the bags, puffing but smiling, while Kenyatta floated ahead, running her fingers along the polished handrails. They stopped at the door of Stateroom 404, the diamond suite, the very one I had paid for. Thinking I was saving the roof of our home, they went inside. I switched the camera to the interior view. Yes, the suites had discrete cameras in the corners of the ceiling for guest safety and dispute resolution. The audio was crystal clear. Lord have mercy, Torius, Kenyatta squealed, tossing her purse onto the massive bed, covered in snow-white linens. Look at this balcony. Look at this bathroom. She twirled around the room. Her fuchsia dress was a bright blur against the cream walls. Torius, wiping his sweat, flopped into an armchair and spread out in a satisfied grin. Well, was it worth it? Kenyatta rushed to the table where a welcome bottle of champagne was waiting in an ice bucket. Open it quickly, he said, gazing lovingly at his wife. We need to celebrate the start of our freedom. The pop of the cork sounded dry, like a gunshot through the speakers in my cabin. Devorius poured the sparkling wine into tall flutes. Foam spilled over the edge, dripping onto the carpet, but they didn't care. To us, Kenyatta proclaimed, raising her glass, and to finally breaking out of that crypt. They clinketed glasses. Tavarorius took a big gulp and chuckled. Listen, I felt a little awkward when we left. Kenyatta snorted, her face contorting into a mocking grimace, and she put down her glass before hunching over and shuffling her feet, imitating a shaky gait. Her voice changed, becoming pathetic and scratchy, a caricature of mine, even though I never spoke that way. Oh, kids, you go on. The kiddies and I will remain here. Keep watch over the house. Oh, I can't, she said, and they both burst out laughing. Save a penny. Torius, she's so innocent. No cash. She didn't even choke after swallowing it. As long as we don't annoy her, the elderly here believes all we say. Pour us, Torius continued, pouring himself more tea. She's probably sitting there now, sipping her empty tea and thinking that. I looked at the screen without blinking and said, well, it's fine. Let her guard. Fresh air is good for her. And we are royalty. I was holding a steaming cup of coffee, yet it was not shaking. I felt revulsion instead of pain, like I was looking at roaches that had gotten into the sugar dish. They had a sense of immunity. They believed they owned the planet. Okay, enough about depressing things. Kenyatta took a big swallow of her champagne. Come on. I'd want to visit the eatery. They claim that the chef is French and that we must promptly replace the staff. If not, they enjoy relaxing with visitors. They slammed the door behind them and exited the cabin. I witnessed Kenyatta yanking a passing maid's cart out of the way by snapping her fingers under her nose. I grabbed the internal phone and punched in a quick number. Yes, Madam St. James. Emir's voice was clear as I said, Captain, military. The 404 visitors are no longer in the cabin. Start Phase 2. Block their key cards and arrange their belongings carefully but without undue regard. It will be finished. The new assignments, keys are prepared. I reclined in my seat. The performance was about to begin. An hour went by. The Mississippi waters were painted in gold as the sun started to drop. After blowing its horn, the golden magnolia glided away from the wharf. According to the cameras, Tavorius and Kenyatta were intimidating a bartender on the middle deck and demanding that he redo cocktails that they believed had excessive amounts of ice. Flushed and proud of themselves, they went back to their sweet stores to get ready for dinner. I switched the sound back on. Torius tapped his card against the lock nonchalantly. The red indicator blinked. He scowled, cleaned the card on the sleeve of his blazer, and then tapped it once more. Red. Kenyatta asked anxiously, "What are you digging around for?" "I have to use the restroom." "Yeah, it demagnetized or something," said Torius, becoming anxious. He gave the handle a jerk. The door was securely locked. Just then, as if by chance, a senior steward, a young man with a stone face and impeccable posture, came around the corner. Kenyatta yelled, "Pros, folks, your stupid card isn't working. Please open the door for us right now. It contains our belongings." The steward's eyes stayed chilly despite his courteous grin. He took out a tablet, looked over the information, and shook his head. "Oh, Mrs. St. James, I'm sorry. During the booking process, an administrative error occurred. As you can see, a priority shareholder list has this suite reserved. There was a reallocation of assets." What Torius's eyes widened. "Which resources?" "We made a payment of $15,000. Our cabin is this one. Unfortunately, your stay in this category was cancelled by the system." The steward persisted without flinching. "Your possessions have already been moved to a statita room that matches your confirmed allegiance status at this time." He gave Vorius 2 regular mechanical keys with thick brass tags. They have the number 0012 stamped on them. "What location is that?" Without taking the key, Kenyatta asked in a dubious manner. "Ma'am, lower deck, adjacent to the engineering block in the stern sector." "Are you serious?" The sound of her scream reverberated throughout the hallway. "Within the beach. Do you wish to ram us into the beach?" "I'll voice my complaints. The manager is where? The captain is where?" "In the VIP area, on the sun deck, is the administration office." Calmly, The steward pointed to the stairs in response. Unfortunately, though, the choice is final. Kenyatta grabbed the steward's keys and hurled them at Tavor. She grabbed her spouse by the elbow and growled, "Let's go. This two-bit operation will be dismantled by us. I'll take them to court. They'll be on their hands and knees." They hurried for the stairs that led to the upper deck, where I was waiting for them in a cozy recliner, while taking in the quiet and the sunset. They stomped like elephants as they twirled about. I took a drink of espresso, repositioned my glasses, and opened a book of French poetry. The sound of stairway footsteps increased. Anger was on the verge of colliding with my reality's cliffs. The VIP sunned deck door blasted open with such power that it sounded like a battering ram had broken through. The gulls, circling the stern, idly fled in terror at the smack of metal against the magnetic stop. I placed the porcelain cup to my lips and turned a page slowly, enjoying the rustle of thick paper, without even flinching. This terrible manager, where are you? The harmony of wind and waves was destroyed as Kenyatta's high-pitched voice cut through the river air. I insist that someone come out here right now. Breathless from the sprint, Torius repeated. We paid money. It's not your place to put us in a doghouse. Ready to crush and shatter, they exploded into the deck. They looked frantically for a victim, someone wearing a uniform, to throw their poison upon. However, the deck was deserted, just a waiter with a silver coffee pot frozen at a respectful distance, and me seated at the center table beneath a canvas canopy. They went cold. Initially, all they saw was a shadow, a woman with a wide-brimmed hat, enormous black glasses that obscured half of her face, and an immaculate white linen suit. A woman who exudes tranquility and that certain slack-jawed self-assurance that only comes from extremely wealthy people. The words stuck in Kenyatta's throat as she took a step closer and opened her mouth to continue yelling. She narrowed her eyes. I took my glasses off gently and examined them. No cry could drown out the hush that hung over the deck. Well, Mom. With his jaw down and his face stretched, Tavorius exhaled, giving the impression that he was a stupid fish tossed upon the bank. Kenyatta paled, then flushed, her neck showing signs of rage. You, she cried out loud, and there was as much incredulity as fury in that cry. What are you doing here? I asked, checking my watch and carefully setting the glasses on the table beside the book. Drinking Kenyatta and coffee while taking in the scenery until you interrupted it with your yelling. Tavorius clenched his fists and stepped toward me. His fear turned to violence. The defensive response of a helpless guy whose own illusions have forced him into a tight spot. He spat a little and said, Are you stalking us? Have you completely lost your mind, old woman? Get out of here, you crazy stalker. How did you even get here? On whose dime? It's our money. The revelation struck Kenya. Her eyes were burning with a fervent sparkle as she flew to the table. You stole our money. You didn't pay for the repair. You bought a ticket to ruin our vacation. It was my money, Kenyatta, I replied calmly, not raising my voice. The money I saved for years, which you too stole from me, under the guise of rotten beams. Kenyatta lost the remnants of her self-control. She lunged across the table, trying to grab me by the lapel of my jacket to shake me out of the chair. Get out of here. Security. Throw this pauper out. Her fingers with long, sharp nails almost touched the fabric of my suit when a voice like a ship's horn shook the air. Remove your hands. It wasn't a shout. It was a command given in a tone that allowed no second of delay. Kenyatta recoiled as if shocked by electricity. Tavarorius tucked his head into his shoulders. From the doors of the bridge, Captain Thaddeus, emerged in his dress uniform with gold stripes on the sleeves and a peaked cap. He looked like a cliff face. Behind him stood two burly security officers. Thaddeus walked past the frozen Tavarorius without even looking at him and stood between me and Kenyatta. His shadow covered my daughter-in-law completely. Remove your hands from the owner of this vessel, he rumbled, looking down at Kenyatta with undisguised contempt. As he tried to process what he had heard, Tavarorius blinked. Owner, he said again, his voice breaking. Captain, you're mistaken. He pointed a finger at me while giggling uncomfortably. This is my mother. She's a pensioner. She lives in a guest cottage. She only has money for sweet tea. He then slowly turned to face Tavor. His eyes were icy. He said, Mr. St. James, in a cold voice, allow me to enlighten you. Madame Oelia St. James is the holder of the controlling interest in Riverflow Holdings. She owns this shipping company, that port back there, and this riverboat from keel to stack. Torius changed his mind. His gaze shifted from me to the captain and back again. He saw the world falling apart, the world in which I was elderly and stupid and he was clever and crafty. Whispering, "That can't be." Kenyatta held onto the back of an empty chair to keep herself upright. "Technically," Thaddeus added, mercilessly eliminating them. "She has nothing. She gave everything to us. You are currently not at a resort. You are in Madame Oilia's living room, and judging by your behavior, you are uninvited guests who have also committed an act of aggression and trespassing in a private zone." I watched as the meaning of his words sank in, not just the wealth, but the fact that they had stolen 15,000 from a person who controlled millions. They stole loose change from a dragon they thought was a lizard. Mama Torius wheezed. His legs gave out. He didn't sit. He collapsed. His knees hit the tick decking with a dull thud. Kenyatta slumped next to him. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. Their arrogance, their superiority, it all evaporated, leaving only animal terror before the woman who continued to calmly stir her coffee with a little spoon. "Immer," I said quietly, not looking at the cowering couple. "The coffee is getting cold. Sit down. We need to discuss the route. Take them out of my sight," I threw out quietly, returning to my cup. Security lifted them by their arms like sandbags. Torius was still mumbling something. His feet dragged along the deck while Kenyatta, conversely, had gone numb, turning into a statue of horror and bewilderment. They weren't kicked off the ship, not yet. Emmerich knew my intentions without words. For them, a special torture was prepared. Uncertainty in a confined space. They were taken to cabin 012. I knew that cabin. It was directly above the propeller shaft. There were no portholes, and the vibration from the engine was such that a glass of water on the nightstand constantly walked across the surface. The perfect place for reflection. All day, I didn't make a sound. I let them stew in their own juices, in fear and conjecture. I imagined Kenyatta pacing from wall to wall in that tight box, hissing at Tavorius, trying to come up with an excuse. "It was a loan. We just borrowed it. We would have paid it back. She's a mother. She'll forgive, surely," she kept repeating. They hoped that my maternal heart, which they had trampled for so many years, would show weakness again. By 8 p.m., I sent a steward to them. He delivered an envelope of thick cream paper with gold embossing, an invitation to dinner, private dining room, the Romanov. 8:30 p.m. I arrived early. The room was small, intimate, designed for high-level business negotiations, walls paneled in oak, dim sconce lighting, heavy velvet drapes, the color of dark emerald. I sat at the head of the table. Before me was a dish of baked trout and a glass of dry Riesling. Exactly at 8:30, the doors opened. They walked in hesitantly. Kenyatta had managed to change into a black cocktail dress. Apparently, she decided a mournful look would score pity points. Tavorius was in the same blazer, crumpled and pathetic. They looked like school children called to the principal's office, but hope still flickered in their eyes. Hope that I had played boss, and now we would make up. Mama Tavorius began, taking a cautious step toward the table. "We are so glad that we can talk calmly. Sit." I pointed to the two chairs opposite me. They sat. Kenyatta immediately pasted a smile on her face, though the corners of her lips trembled. "Mother Oilia," she cooed nervously, tearing at a napkin. "What a terrible misunderstanding today. We were so shocked. You understand, nerves, this renovation, we just wanted what was best. We just didn't want to worry you with our problems." I continued, silently cutting a piece of fish. The clink of silverware against porcelain was the only sound in the room. They waited for menus, waited for waiters, waited for wine, but the table before them was empty. No forks, no glasses, only polished wood and a thick gray cardboard folder lying in the center. Whereas Tavorius looked around in confusion. "You will not be served dinner." I put down my fork, dabbed my lips with a napkin, and looked at my son. There was no warmth in that look, only fatigue. "Have you eaten, Tavor? You've been eating at my expense for the last 5 years. I think you're full to the throat." "What are you talking about?" He tried to feign misunderstanding, but his eyes darted to the folder. I reached out and slowly, with a quiet scrape, pushed the folder toward them across the table. "Open it." Tavorius flipped the cover with trembling fingers. Kenyatta craned her neck, peering at the papers. The first page was a spreadsheet. Numbers, columns, dates, red marker notes. "That is not a cruise bill," I said, taking a sip of wine. "That is a forensic accounting audit, a full audit of my personal accounts, and the accounts I gave you access to via power of attorney." Tavorius paused until he blended with the tablecloth. Kenyatta swallowed convulsively. "Did you think I didn't notice?" My voice was quiet, but every word fell like a stone. Receipt for hypertension medication, $400. But withdrawn from the card 1,500. Mama, prices went up. The pharmacy is expensive. But in reality, the difference went to Kenyatta's manicures. I turned the page in my memory, knowing the document by heart. Groceries. You brought me a bag of grits and milk, but wrote off 1,000 a week as helping Mama. You even paid for gas for your SUV with my pension card. Torius, it's a mistake. My son wheezed, but didn't dare raise his eyes. And now, the roof repair. I continued ruthlessly. 15,000. The climax of your greed. You didn't just steal that money. You stole it while looking me in the eye and telling fairy tales about rotten beams. You stole it knowing it was my last savings for a rainy day. Oh yeah, listen. Kenyatta shrieked, realizing the earth was sliding from under her feet. It was a loan. We wanted to return it. Tavarorius is having trouble at work. We just enough. I slammed my palm on the table. The sound was sharp and short. They flinched. I wasn't senile, Torius, I said very softly, and that softness terrified them more than screaming. I was patient. I hoped your conscience would wake up, that you would remember who bought you that house you live in, who paid for your education. I waited for you to be satisfied, but you are insatiable. I closed my eyes for a second, saying goodbye to the illusion of family I had tried to preserve. My patience ended yesterday when I found that invoice in the trash can. I nodded at the folder. Check the last page. Bank notification. An hour ago, I revoked all powers of attorney. Your cards linked to my accounts are blocked. Joint accounts are frozen pending the investigation into embezzlement. Embezzlement. Tavarorius looked up at me, eyes full of horror. Mama, you're pressing charges. Your personal cards are currently overdrawn, I continued, ignoring his question. Credit limits annulled by my order as the owner of the partner bank. You don't have a dime, not even for a bottle of water. Kenyatta jumped up, knocking over her chair. You can't do this. We are your family. We are here in the middle of the river. How will we live? How would you live without me? I answered calmly, humbly and quietly. I pressed the button to summon the staff. Dinner is concluded. You are dismissed. Go to your cabin. You need to sleep. Tomorrow will be a hard day for you. The doors opened and the figure of the head of security appeared in the frame. Tavarorius and Kenyatta, hunching over, dragged themselves to the exit. Clutching the folder of evidence of their shame to their chests, they walked into the darkness of the lower decks, and I remained in the light of the lamps, alone, with cold fish and the bitter taste of victory, which tasted like ash. The morning of the next day met me with thick milky fog rolling over the water. I sat in the carrium on the upper deck, a glass-enclosed veranda, where palms and orchids grew, creating the illusion of a tropical paradise in the middle of the American autumn. In my hands was a cup of herbal tea, and a plaid blanket lay on my knees. It was quiet here, but the silence was deceptive. I knew that several decks below, in the cramped cabin 012, where the screw vibration rattled bones, a storm was raging. Security reported that the screaming started in the night. Rats backed into a corner always start biting each other, stripped of money, status, and most importantly, the illusion of impunity. Tavarorius and Kenyatta predictably began looking for someone to blame, and of course, each saw the other as the culprit. The door to the solarium creaked softly. I didn't turn around, continuing to watch the prow of the riverboat slice through the gray sheet of water. Mother Oilia. The voice was quiet, trembling, soaked with tears. I slowly placed the cup on the saucer. The clink of china sounded unnaturally loud. Turning my head, I saw She looked different. The haughty posture was gone. The predatory glint in her eyes vanished. She wore a simple black dress. Her hair was messily gathered in a bun, and her face was untouched by makeup, which only highlighted her red, swollen eyes. She stood at the entrance, nervously wringing her hands like a schoolgirl coming to confess to breaking a window. "May I?" she whispered. I gestured to the wicker chair opposite. "Sit, Kenyatta." She walked over and sat on the very edge, hunching over, trying to appear smaller. "I couldn't sleep," she began, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. "Torius, he went off the rails. He was screaming, blaming me for everything." She sobbed, covering her face with her palms. I watched this performance with detached curiosity, like a theatergoer who knows the plot by heart. "Oh yeah, you have to listen to me." Kenyatta took her hands from her face and looked at me pleadingly. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know the scale. Torius always said it was his money, that it was bonuses, deals that went well. I believed him. He's the man, the provider. How was I supposed to know that he was stealing from his own mother? She leaned forward, trying to catch my eye. I'm a victim, too. You understand? He used me. He forced me to live high on the hog to maintain his image. By this, we're that. We have to fit in. I just wanted to be a good wife. And now you think I'm a monster. Her voice broke into a whisper. I love you, Mama. I always wanted us to be a real family. But Torius, he turned me against you. He said nasty things. He walled us off. He came up with the roof story. I told him we can't take Mama's last dime. And he laughed and said, you wouldn't understand anyway. I silently picked up the teapot and poured her a cup. Steam rose up, smelling of herbs and lies. Drink, I said evenly. Your throat is dry from so many words. Kenyatta grabbed the cup with both hands like a drowning woman grabbing a straw. Thank you. Oilia, you are a saint. I'm not worthy of your generosity. I only want you to be aware that I am leaving him. I'm going to file for divorce as soon as we return. A liar and a thief are not people I can live with. I'll get to work. I'll reimburse you in full. Just don't let me leave your life. Please, let me try to make things right. Her eyes were devoted and clear as she gazed at me. I might have believed that if I hadn't known her for 10 years, her performance was perfect, the ideal victim of a despotic spouse. I sipped my tea, feeling the warmth travel throughout my body as I saw the light and felt remorse. You are very convincing, Kenyatta, I remarked considerately, sounding almost gifted. Torius really is weak. He's a follower, clay in someone else's hands. Kenyatta's face brightened. She decided the hook was swallowed. Yes, exactly. He's weak, and I just fell under his influence. But there is one detail. I put the cup on the table and picked up the tablet lying next to a bowl of cookies. This vessel has very modern security systems, especially in the lower compartments where the engine rooms and crew quarters are, where you are currently living. Kenyatta froze. The smile of hope began to slowly slide off her face, exposing fear. Due to engine noise and insurance requirements, I continued in a lecturing tone, swiping my finger across the screen. Audio recording runs 247 in those cabins in case of emergencies or passenger conflicts. I pressed a file icon. The silence of the winter garden was torn by a sharp, hysterical voice. Kenyatta's voice, but not the one sitting in front of me now, the real one. The recording was made late last night. You idiot, Tavor. You spineless jellyfish. You couldn't even lie properly. Thundered from the tablet speakers. Then my son's voice was heard, pitiful and defensive. Kenyatta, keep it down. They might hear us. I don't give a damn. Kenyatta screamed on the recording. Let them hear. As soon as we get off on shore, I'm finding lawyers. We're declaring her incompetent. She clearly has senile dementia. If she thinks she's some business tycoon, we'll dump that old cow in a state facility, the cheapest one, where they'll break her quickly, and we'll sell the house. I am not losing my money because you're afraid of mommy. I hit pause. The last words, old cow, hung in the air, reflecting off the glass walls of the greenhouse. Kenyatta turned white. The blood drained from her face so rapidly, she looked like she was about to faint. Her mouth opened, but she couldn't make a sound. All her words about love, sacrifice, and monster, Tavarorius, crumbled to dust in a second. I looked at her without anger, only with infinite fatigue. Nursing home? I asked quietly. Stay on the cheapest one. Kenyatta started shaking her head, backing away, along with the chair. The chair legs screeched against the floor. That was emotions. I didn't mean it. You never wanted a mother-in-law. I interrupted her, closing the tablet cover. You didn't want a family. You wanted a sponsor. You only saw me as a wallet on legs that for some reason was living too long. I stood up. Kenyatta pressed herself into the chair as if expecting a blow. Sponsorship canceled, I declared. Go to your husband. Take pleasure in each other's company. There's not much time left before you arrive. I made it obvious that the audience was over by turning and moving to the window. I heard someone sobbing and breathing heavily behind my back, followed by the scurrying, stumbling steps of someone running away. A golden forest drifted past beyond the glass. But all I could see was my own face reflected there, stern, serene, and at last free. The sound of a struggle and labored breathing pierced the quiet of my private library. No more than an hour after the chat in the solarium, the doors sprang open, almost falling off their hinges. While I was seated in a deep leather armchair, going over the cargo records for the previous quarter, in the entryway came an odd procession. Kenyatta hurried ahead, literally dragging a man in a white coat by the sleeve. Her once pitying, tear-stained visage was now contorted in a grimace of mad resolve. Behind her, Torius staggered and looked around wildly. Kenyatta yelled, "Here, doctor, faster," and pulled the doctor so violently that the poor man's coat almost tore. The ship's doctor, a 50-year-old man with a gray beard and weary eyes, attempted to free his arm, but my daughter-in-law's hold was unbreakable. "She's here. She's dangerous to herself and others. Calm down, ma'am." He attempted to use reason with her. "This is not how you enter the VIP area. You're not understanding." Gasping for breath, Toyas cut him off. As if scared that I would bite him, he ran toward me but halted a few steps away. "Her madness is severe. She is delirious. This ship is hers, she says." Kenyatta gestured to me with a finger. The chipped lacquer on her nail shook. "Watch her shuffling papers while sitting like a queen. Doctor, she has dementia. Progressive paranoia accompanied by grandiose fantasies. Our money was stolen by her. We were locked in the BGE. She created some holdings for River. Give her an injection. An espionage. Haloperidol. Anything to stop her from saying this bullshit." After carefully taking off my reading glasses, I set them on top of the report. Their strategy was as brittle and transparent as glass. Declaring me incompetent was the only option left if they were unable to convince me or threaten me. As next of kin, they would be granted temporary guardianship if a doctor documented acute psychosis and delirium, and that included authority over the insane old woman, access to accounts, and the ability to sign. It was their final wager. "Doctor, I demand you document her condition," Kenyatta yelled, spewing saliva. At last, the doctor pulled his sleeve away from Kenyatta's gripping fingers and said, "We need a medical report for guardianship. We have to save her assets before she gives them away in a fit of madness. She doesn't understand where she is." He straightened the stethoscope around his neck, fixed his coat, and stepped forward. Torius gave him a hopeful glance. "Doctor, hurry up. Inquire with her. Find out from her whose ship this is. Check it out for yourself." With a heavy sigh, the doctor removed his thin-rimmed glasses and used a handkerchief he brought out of his pocket to wipe them. And then he looked up at me. Sparks of laughter danced in those eyes. He was attempting in vain to conceal himself under a business mask. "Good afternoon, Madam St. James," he remarked in a calm, gentle tone. "The morning medication was helpful. How is your blood pressure today?" There was a ringing silence in the room. Kenyatta's jaw dropped open as she froze. Tavorius blinked as though an unseen hand had smacked him. I said, "Good afternoon, Dr. Botchump," with a small smile on the corners of my mouth. "Thank you. Pressure is normal, 120/80. The river air works wonders. Shame, some passengers make too much noise." Dr. Botchumpius stammered, You know each other." The doctor turned to them. All his softness vanished. Now, he looked at them like dirt stuck to the sole of a boot. "Young people," he pronounced in an icy tone. "I have been Oilia's personal physician for 22 years. I managed her rehabilitation after her husband's stroke. I monitor her cardiology. I know every mole on her body and every neuron in her brain." He took a step toward Torius, and my son backed up, hitting the bookcase. "You claim your mother has dementia," Dr. Botchum continued, still ringing in his voice. "Strange. Her last MRI showed her cerebral vessels are in better condition than both of yours. Judging by the idiocy you've staged here, her mind is clearer than any captain on this river. But your hysteria suggests a need for a psychiatric evaluation. But for you," Kenyatta grabbed her head, sliding down the doorframe. "But we didn't know," she whispered. "How? You didn't know?" I interrupted her, not getting up from the chair. "Because you didn't care. For 20 years. Dr. Basham came to our house once a month. Did you ever ask whose car was at the gate? Did you ever ask what medicine I take? No, you only saw yourselves." Dr. Basham pulled a notepad from his chest pocket, quickly wrote something, tore out the sheet, and handed it to Tavor. "What is this?" "That is a bill," the doctor stated politely, "for a false emergency call of a senior specialist after hours for an unplanned consultation on mental health assessment." The son inquired dutifully, glancing at the document. "The patient is said to have perfect mental health, but my time costs a fortune." Torius examined the figure. He became great. 500, he sighed. "We are broke. The cards are not allowed to be used. I don't have that problem." Dr. Bacump turned away from them and shrugged. "Your cabin debt will be charged for the bill. You'll have to explain it to the onshore police if you don't pay before you get to the port. Greetings." After giving me a little wink, he left the library, silently shutting the door behind him. They left me by myself, amidst the luxury they so desperately desired, which had turned them away. They were two broken figures. Leave, I said, putting my glasses back on, going back to the report, and shutting the door behind me. Kenyatta was grabbed by the hand by Tor. She stared straight ahead while walking like a zombie. They departed. The lock's click sounded like the last nail in their coffin's lid. Even the things they had never truly had were gone. I peered out the window. The coast was getting closer. A weathered landing and aged cypress trees. The beginning of my path and the end of theirs. The entire riverboat trembled and came to a stop, slamming dully onto the dock's rubber bumpers. The sound of wind in the willows and the cawing of crows circling above the empty levee drowned out the hum of the motors. We had traveled hundreds of miles along damaged roads to reach Cottonwood Point, a barren but eerily beautiful landing in rural Arkansas. I was on the lower deck at the main exit. I wore that same silk scarf and a camel hair coat. The security guard towered over me, arms folded across his chest. A minute later, Tavarorius and Kenyatta emerged into the corridor. They appeared pitiful, jittery, with rumpled dark circles under their eyes. Tavoris smiled briefly upon seeing me. His eyes glowed with hope, the foolish, naive hope of a child who thinks that his mother will undoubtedly give him candy after he spends time in the corner. Mom, he gave an unsure smile. Here we are. Are we going on an excursion? You made the decision to show us the former cotton fields and to pardon us. This place is said to have a strong history. Kenyatta stared drowsily at the open gangway hatch while remaining silent. I remarked sourly, not smiling back at him. This is your stop. Leave. Oh, wonderful. Torius tried to look enthusiastic as he nodded. Let's go for a stroll. Take a breath. Kenyatta will benefit from it. She has completely collapsed. We'll simply pick up our coats. You don't have to go back inside the cabin. The voice of the security chief was like a hammer strike. Leave, Mr. and Mrs. St. James. They went cold. They were oblivious to the chilly fall air blowing in from the street as it passed over their faces. Kenyatta muttered, "What do you mean, exit?" I gave the open gangway a nod. Proceed. You're anticipated. They moved onto the gangway's metal grating after being prodded by the intense security stare. Slowly and unsurely they went down, glancing back as though they thought I would laugh and call it a joke. However, they noticed it as soon as their feet made contact with the landing's wet, fractured pavement. Their suitcases were standing just in front of them, pressed floridly against one another. In New Orleans, they proudly dragged 4 enormous plastic cases on board. A folder containing the eviction notice and the unpaid doctor's bill was lying next them. Tavarorius froze, before turning his attention to the empty levee with no buses or taxis, and just a lone dog smelling a ballard. He glanced at the suitcases. He then glanced up at my position, leaning on the railing. With a shriek in his voice, he yelled, "Mama, what does this signify? Are you going to abandon us here?" Like an anchor, Kenyatta gripped the handle of a bag. "Do you not have a right?" She stomped her foot and sobbed. "This is a remote location. We are broke. The cards are not allowed to be used. How are we going to get home? The distance is 500 miles. I glanced down at them. They looked very tiny from this height. Petty, busy insects, not powerful predators, are poisoning my life. I was not cold, even though the wind was whipping my hair. I felt warm for the first time in years. Before you left, you warned me. No money. Stay home. The crows were drowned out by my voice, which was amplified by the river acoustics and carried over the landing. I stopped so that each word would fully register in their minds. You said you couldn't afford a ticket for your mother. The deckhands had already begun lowering the gangway when Torius hurried to it, saying, "Well, now you have no money, and you cannot afford to continue this journey. Mommy," with a clang, metal ripped from concrete, "forgive us. We'll pay everything back. Don't leave us here. We'll die. You are young, healthy," I replied quietly. "You have hands and feet. Find a job or hitchhike. After all, you always said you were self-made, that you achieved everything yourselves. Here is your chance to prove it without my money." The crash snapped the gangway into place. The dark water turned to foam as the gilded Magnolia's engines roared. Slowly, the riverboat started to float away from the dock. Kenyatta screamed, "Stop, stop, you old witch." After understanding that begging would not help, her shoes simply splashed into the sea as she hurled it at the ship. I didn't even weep. "I curse you. You'll die alone." Their cries grew softer, absorbed by the sound of the water and the distance. They were standing on the deserted, windswept dock when I saw them, 2 small figures in an unfamiliar location with a pile of worthless items and no money in their pockets. I looked away from the coast. On the concrete, the history remained. Emmerich came over to me. He removed his headgear and gave me a curious look. Madame St. James's New Orleans course is back on track. I gazed ahead as the river grew wider and vanished into the boundless distance. Sunlight was peeking through the clouds as the skies began to clear. I responded, "No, Captain," and my lips quirked at the corners. After taking a big breath, I said, "To hell with the schedule." It was a pleasant air. A glimmer of adventure appeared in his eyes as he said, "Plot a course north, Emmerich, all the way up to the headwaters to Minnesota. That's 2 more weeks at sea. There, what did we forget? I've always wanted to see the upper Mississippi's fall foliage," I said. "It is said to resemble a sea of fire when the maples turn. For 30 years, I put it off. Work came first, followed by a husband, a son, and unborn grandkids. Enough postponing. Something large, forgotten, and scorching rose in my chest. It was neither a smirk nor a laugh. I laughed and threw my head back to the sky. The gulls were startled by the big, clear, ringing laugh that soared above the Mississippi, the laugh of freedom. I chuckled at the ridiculousness of life, at their avarice, and at my previous blindness. I chuckled with joy. I was wealthy. I owned a ship, and I had a river of time in front of me. It was not the end of my life. It was only getting started. Did you enjoy the narrative? And from which city are you listening? Let's get together in the comments. To help me continue to provide more stories like this, please write me a fantastic thank you if you enjoy the story. I sincerely appreciate your kind support. I'm eager to hear your thoughts on the narrative. 2 brand new life stories that I strongly suggest are displayed on the screen. My channel has a ton more content. Remember to subscribe. See you in the next chapter of your life. With respect and affection.